Hello and shalom, brothers and sisters of Messiah Yeshua. Welcome back. I'm Jeremy, and today we're talking about megalithic beasts before the flood, the dinosaurs. So typically when you hear people talk about the biblical verses in Genesis where it says, and there were giants in the earth in those days, people either look at that as the sons of Seth or the righteous, or they look at them as giants. And I tend to believe from the books of Enoch and Jubilees that it was giants, talking about people and so forth. But what if it's also talking about dinosaurs? Because these are giant beasts, and so we're going to look at that today, these dinosaurs. And the reason that I chose this topic of dinosaurs today is because I've been taking a little bit of a hiatus, and then we celebrated the Feast of Tabernacles. For those of you that don't know, that's a biblical feast of Sukkot, 7 days and an eighth day, which is the shadows and pictures of our time here on earth, tabernacling in these physical suits of, flesh suits, as some would say, or these bodies that are not eternal, they're immortal. And the eighth day being a picture of the last great day, the day that never ends in eternity. And during this time, I talked to lots of believers, and the discussion of dinosaurs kept coming up, and people really, in the faith, I was surprised that they don't have an answer to unbelievers that say, well, what do you do with dinosaurs? How do you explain those? And I found it interesting that the simplest answer they don't really use, or they themselves don't understand. So I wanted to get into this real quick and look at dinosaurs and talk about that for the subject today. And I know many of you are like, why are we dinosaurs? But stick with me. Let's go through it and talk about it, discuss it, leave your comments and your questions, and we'll address those at a later period. All right, so moving forward, those of you that don't know my channel, I do believe that before there was a biblical flood, that there was a Stone Age megalithic world. So all these monuments that we see around the world that are carved in stone, megalithic in size, they're all buried. We have to dig them up. I believe that they were there before the flood. We have pictures of half man, half animals, regular-sized beings, large animals, large people. And so I believe that this is what the Bible is talking about, that in that day that there were giants in the earth. But we're also going to look at the dinosaurs today, because I believe that there was a civilization that was built in stone, buried by the biblical flood, and this flood covered that whole Stone Age world in water, leaving behind rubble, debris, buried ruins, fossils, and mud as evidence for us that the Word of God is still true, accurate, and relevant for our lives today. So with that, we have these things that we find. They're completely buried, not just by sand blowing, but rubble and debris. And we have to dig them up and find them and try and learn the languages that are written in stone on the walls. Many of them we've deciphered, a lot of them we haven't, because we don't know the language, and the people that are there don't know the language. They've just developed religions or different types of worship based off of what they saw carved in stone on the walls. And it does say in Genesis that in that day before the flood, that every imagination of the thoughts of man's heart was only evil continually. And those of you that watch my channel know that we were created eternally in the beginning only to know good, not to know evil, because knowing evil is what's caused all the murders, death, adulteries, lust, greed, all the sin in the world today that turns us away from God is because of the evil intents of heart that we have to battle over. The Bible is a psychological book. The battle is taking place in our minds and our thoughts and in our heart over spiritual things, what we call feelings and emotions, the Bible calls spirit. And it's a battle between good and evil within you that we have to battle now, knowing good and evil. But during the flood, that their hearts turned to evil only continually. So that means their thoughts were always of wickedness, and they acted on it. Lusts, adultery, murders, theft, greed, all of that, and that's all they were acting on. And so that's what brought the flood. And many people will teach that these giants that were in the earth are the reason the flood came, and that might be part of it. But from what I've read, most, if not all of them, actually warred against themselves and killed themselves before the flood. And it was man, not the giants or the Nephilim, that the fallen angels. They were all bound and killed before. And I know there's the scriptures that say that they were before and after the flood. I've done a teaching on that before. We remember that The Nephilim spirit, when they died, it remained in the earth even after the flood until the judgment. And that's what these demons, when they said to Yeshua, have you come to judge us before the time? He didn't. He cast them out into the pigs because the time was not yet for the judgment. So with that background, we can go ahead and get started. And again, in Jubilees, we've looked at the megalithic stuff. It talks about Arphaxad. He found from former generations, or pre-flood, because he's one of the generations right after the flood, that they had carved in rock, writing that they had carved in rock. And where is it from? The teaching of the Watchers, from the fallen angels that gave their knowledge to mankind through their children and so forth, that man was not supposed to know. All right, we've looked at all these places around the world. So far, this is many of the places we've looked at megalithic sites, and we'll continue this moving forward. But today I wanted to talk about dinosaurs. And they're found all over the earth, just like these megalithic sites are. And these are beasts that are huge. And how did they get so big? And that's one of the things people will say, well, millions of years ago. But the answer is not millions of years ago, but thousands of years ago, and covered, preserved by a flood. And every place they dig these dinosaur bones up, they say, oh, it was a local flood, or maybe it was the Ice Age or a comet. But regardless of what you believe, every one of these dinosaurs were buried alive. And that's actual evidence for the Bible. If you take millions of years out of it, and people will say, well, how come the Bible doesn't mention these things? And we'll look at that. It does. But in different words, and we'll see that. But the evidence that every one of these are buried, just like these megalithic sites around the world, is evident that there was a worldwide flood. Not just a local flood, but the whole earth covered, a big ball of water sitting out hung upon nothing. The whole world was covered. And then that water started going back up in the atmosphere, creating the clouds, and some of it went back into the crevices of the rock that were broke, leaving now these dinosaurs buried. But there would probably have been thousands of them left also on the surface. But the sun, the weather, and the animal, whatever would have deteriorated their bones and their flesh and everything, leaving nothing behind. But the ones that were buried, and we're going to find not just animals were buried, but also people. We'll look at that, because all around the earth we have megalithic cities buried. We have dinosaurs buried. We also have people that were buried and running from things. We have evidence of people running with dinosaurs. And we'll look at all those and talk about those. All right. So Genesis 6:4 says, and there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them, the same became mighty men of old, men of renown. So people will, like I said, they say that giants also after the flood, and yes, we see that people talked about dinosaurs before the flood and after the flood. Some of the books talk about, there's extra books of Daniel where it talks about this dragon, and we're not going to get into that here. But there's before and after the flood, and I'll talk about my theory of the dinosaurs. But these giants, not only I believe were people, but also it can be referring to dinosaurs as well, because one of the things that we're going to look at is how did dinosaurs survive before the flood, because science has shown today they can't survive in our atmosphere because there's not enough oxygen. But they will say billions of years ago, but not billions of years ago, only thousands of years ago. So I've done another teaching on this, though, where after the flood they were spirits, evil spirits. But did the DNA exist for giants? Yes, still it could. We see, Og and so forth, David and Goliath. So before and after. But some of the scriptures talk about that these Nephilim, and it might have been referring to the direct sons of the angels, had all died before the flood, but their children, the Nephilim, which are the children of the angels and women, they are called the Nephilim. They also would have had children And so they could have continued later after the flood, or their DNA through the women, however that worked out. But that's not what I want to get into today. I want to look at the dinosaurs. Anyway, moving on. So in Job 40, verse 15, and many of you have seen these scriptures before, it says, "Now behold, Behemoth, which I made with thee, he eats grass as an ox." So this is this behemoth, this animal that eats grass. And his strength is in his loins, and his force is in his navel of his belly. He moves his tail like a cedar tree. Now, people will say, well, it doesn't say it was the size of a cedar tree. It says he moves it like a cedar tree. Okay. But if he moves it like a cedar tree, anybody would use that reference because it's big like that. And so we see that there are dinosaurs in the earth that, the brontosaurus that eats grass, and it moves its tail like a cedar tree. It's giant. But today we don't have animals that have tails that big. And it says, and the sinews of his stones are wrapped together. His bones are strong as brass, and his bones are like bars of iron. So this guy is big and strong. His bones are like bars of iron. So again, you can look at this and believe that he's talking about a dinosaur here. Now, what we also know is that these Behemoth and Leviathan are also pictures of governmental entities that the people, when it talks about the book of Revelation, worshiping the beast and his image, that beast is a governmental system that is opposed to God and his way. But anyway, we'll talk about that in a later video, looking at the two beasts from Revelation, the one that rises out of the sea, which is a picture of which Leviathan is a picture of, and then the one that rises out of the land, which is Behemoth, which he is a picture of the one that rises out of the land. So I believe that these two beasts, Behemoth and Leviathan, were actual creatures, and I believe it is speaking of ancient dinosaurs and a dragon of sorts that actually existed. We see now that are extinct today, though there are references to a Leviathan that maybe still be out there somewhere, and some people believe that that's the case. But these beasts are a picture also of governmental agencies that we see from the book of Daniel. We also see in the book of Revelation that people will be worshiping in the end. And people seem to think that it's all about this, like a person that they're worshiping, but it's a governmental system, and we'll talk more about that later. All right, Leviathan. It says, can you draw Leviathan out with a hook or his tongue with a cord, right? Can you go fishing for him? No. It says, can you put a hook in his nose or bore his jaws through with a thorn? Will he make many supplications with you? Will he speak soft words to you? Will he make a covenant with you? Will you take him for a servant forever? No, you can't. That's what he's basically saying. It goes on in verse 5, it says, will you play with him as with a bird, or will you bind him for thy maidens? Shall the companions make a banquet for him? Shall they part him among the merchants? Can you fill his skin with barbed irons, or his head with fish spears? Lay your hand upon him, and you'll remember the battle no more. So they're saying, you can't mess with this thing. Okay, and it goes on and talks a lot more about Leviathan, but I'm going to hold here, because most of the translations, if you read the footnotes, it'll say that it's talking about a crocodile here. Because translators are afraid to say it's talking about something that may not exist, right? But it's going to go on and say something very interesting about Leviathan. I don't believe it's talking about a crocodile. I believe it's talking about this beast, which is serpent-like, which we will find later. It talks about that. It's a Nahash, like the serpent that was in the garden. In Isaiah, he specifically says that this Leviathan is a Tanim, just like the one that's created in Genesis. So it's a serpent, like the one that was in the garden, and so forth. A Nahash, a Tanim, a Leviathan. They're all interconnected. But it goes on and says about this, interesting that this beast does something that scares people, because we don't see this today. It says, out of his mouth goes burning lamps. Goes on in verse 19. It talks a lot more about him before this, but I just wanted to bring this part up. It says, out of his mouth goes burning lamps, and sparks of fire leap out. Out of his nostrils goes smoke, and out of as a seething pot of a cauldron. His breath kindles coals, and a flame goes out of his mouth. In his neck remains strength, and sorrow is turned into joy before him. So this is a beast that actual fire comes out of his mouth. And people will say that this is poetic language because we don't have something that exists like that today. But I find it interesting that we can find, fireflies, and we can find electric eels that have such a charge in them. We can find fish at the bottom of the ocean that have light bulbs on their heads. And if we hadn't have seen these things and somebody had wrote about them, they would have thought that they were just mythical creatures. But is it too far-fetched to believe that an animal can create such a gas that it can also light a spark like an eel can, and when it burps it out, it comes out as fire? That is not too hard to believe that existed at one point. And all around the earth we see these pictures of these dragons from ancient mythology that look like serpents, that have fire that's coming out of them. And so I believe this was an actual dinosaur of sorts that existed that was able to do that. So up to you if that's what you think, but I believe that this was the case. And it goes on, it says, the flakes of his flesh are joined together, they are firm in themselves, they cannot be moved. His heart is as firm as stone, yes, and his heart is a piece of nether millstone. So he's strong, nobody can mess with him, and he breathes fire. And I find it interesting that at many megalithic sites around the world, there is these giant serpents that are always portrayed. And yet the Bible's telling us that there's one that actually breathed fire. So I do believe that it is talking about dragons and dinosaurs, but we just don't have them today. But do we have the remains of them? We sure do. And so with that, people will say, well, the dinosaurs were from billions of years ago. And that's only the case because we know dinosaurs can't survive in our atmosphere. Well, that's true. Okay, I don't know that that's not true, but the scientists say that is okay. A dinosaur can't breathe today. So they say billions of years ago when oxygen was 35%, because they know that there was 35% oxygen from the sap ambers that they find, and they test the oxygen. There's 35%. Our atmosphere only has 21. But I believe before the flood, the earth was tilted in a different direction. It sped faster. Clouds remained in the atmosphere, kept out the harmful rays, and kept in all the oxygen. There was 86% landmass and only 14% water, which was more trees, more oxygen, longer life, which now reptiles, we know, they continue to grow, most of them. If they were able to live to be 1,000 years, like the Bible said people did, animals too, most animals would stop growing at a certain point, with the exception of many of the reptiles. They would continue to grow and grow and grow and never stop because they don't have that gene. Now, was that the original plan that the Father created dinosaurs and reptiles to be? It could be, or did man manipulate that and change that before the flood? I don't know that either. It could have been both, because there's evidence for things before the flood that we can't explain. Why do all these places around the earth have half man, or normal sized men, and large men, half man, half animal people? They're in all these megalithic sites. It's not just poetic language. It can't be if they're putting things on the walls that they actually saw. And we see these pictures of dragons, and we've seen pictures of dinosaurs. We'll talk about some of those, but not many. But the evidence is there that a flood buried them. And if there was a world that had 35% oxygen, 26 or 86% land, and tons of trees, we would find big trees all over the earth. We would find big animals, lots of big things that kept growing. And that's what we find. We find them, but we say billions of years rather than only a couple of thousand years, 4,000 years ago to be exact. around a little over 4,000 when the flood happened. So dinosaurs, yes, would have been able to exist in this atmosphere, but not afterwards where the oxygen was less. And so it doesn't take billions of years. It only takes 1,000 years for a reptile that doesn't stop growing to go from the size of a little lizard to the size of a T-Rex or what have you, that devours people. And so again, you have 5 times less water. That means more land, more trees, 35% oxygen. You could breathe and run to California from New York and not get tired. But unless you have something that keeps the free radicals out, the x-rays and so forth, we would age faster and die faster. But keeping that out, we would live longer. And also, this is a perfect atmosphere for dinosaurs to thrive in. Not billions of years, only a few years ago, only a few thousand years ago. And so here's some of the pictures of the sap ambers like they find, right? Different animals, mosquitoes and so forth locked in them. And those air bubbles, they test them. Not all of them have 35 because not all of them are as ancient as before the flood, but I believe they are before the flood. And it wasn't billions of years, it was only just a few thousand years ago. And so some sort of water canopy, right? I've talked about this before. I'll show you the verse again here in a moment, that the cloud covers the earth like a garment. And that cloud, or a vapor canopy, or even at some point could it have been like a giant bubble that surrounded the earth as well. And could it be a giant bubble again after the earth changes to, I believe, for the 1,000-year reign of Yeshua, the earth will tilt, speeding it up, allowing the water to stay up in the atmosphere. It could be a giant cloud that surrounds the earth or a giant bubble, but both would keep out that harmful radiation. That means it wouldn't age us as fast, and people would be able to live long again. And that also means lizards will start to grow again and not stop. They'll be able to also live longer in this atmosphere and get bigger and bigger, and so we might see them again. But the Bible does talk about like the lion eating straw, and these animals aren't going to fight against each other. There's also a curious verse in Isaiah 30 verse 26. It says, Moreover, the light of the moon shall be as the light of the sun, and the light of the sun shall be sevenfold, as the light of 7 days. So if the light of the sun and moon are going to be 7 times brighter, one, what causes that? Does the earth get closer to the sun? But if that's the case, I'm pale pasty white. I would burn and fry like nobody's business unless there was something to keep that sevenfold sun, the rays of it, the harmful rays, out, like a bubble or a giant cloud where the water going back up into the atmosphere and more oxygen. If that's the case, your body would thrive. So something has to happen to keep the harmful light out if the sun is going to be 7 times brighter. And it says, when is this going to happen? It says, in the day that Yahweh binds up the breach of his people and heals the stroke of their wound, right? So in the days of Noah, the earth went from a hospitable atmosphere to an inhospitable atmosphere. I believe it's going to go back to hospitable and allowing more oxygen, more trees, more land, keeping out the harmful rays again, and people will live longer. There will also be those that enter into their eternal bodies, but people will still be in mortal bodies. The mortal bodies will be able to survive almost 1,000 years again like they did before the flood. And dinosaurs are evidence of long life, because a dinosaur is just a little lizard that got to live to be hundreds, if not almost 1,000 years old as well. They didn't stop growing, and they lived in a thriving atmosphere where they could breathe. But after the flood, they couldn't. And not only that, most of them, if not all of them, got buried by the flood. And Noah, if he would have taken some of them on the ark with him, afterwards they would have only been able to survive or live to be only not even 100 years old like man. Later on, Noah and Abraham lived into their hundreds and so kept living a little longer. Noah much more, but Abraham and all of them still lived longer lives, but not up to 1,000 years. But animals would have had the same thing. They don't live as long. So now reptiles don't get as big, and they can breathe because they're smaller, and they don't need that type of an atmosphere. All right, it also says pretty much the same thing from the book of Enoch. And usually when I use Enoch, I never use anything that's in there that is not also covered in the Bible. And I believe that most, if not all, of Enoch is already in the Bible. We just don't want to agree with what it's saying about some of these things. It says, and thus and it's speaking of the sun, goes in and out, neither slacking nor resting, but running on its chariot by day and by night. Its light is 7 times brighter than that of the moon. So it's 7 times brighter than the moon, but just like Isaiah said, the sun is 7 times brighter, but it's going to be even 7 times brighter than that. And it says, but the dimensions of both are equal. I want to stop here and talk about this because many people will use this verse and go, see, that's why the book of Enoch is wrong, because it says that the sun and moon are equal in size. And in some translations it does say that, but in others it says they appear equal. But even if that's not the case, if from our point of view, yes, the sun and the moon appear equal. But what you have to think about here is that from what man knows today about the sun and the moon, think of the odds that the moon can eclipse the sun perfectly, like perfectly. What are the odds that it's far away that the sun is from the earth? That if evolution were true, that the sun and the moon evolved to a point where the moon is the exact perfect size to be able to eclipse the sun. The odds of that are they're like almost zero of how big everything is in the expanse, and it's impossible unless somebody, a creator, made it that way. Think about that for a minute. But again, it doesn't say that in all translations that they are equal, because even if they were equal in size, they would never be able to eclipse each other. We know they appear equal, and from our eyes they're the same size. But again, some translations say they appear equal. And in Job, this is where I talked about it, says, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? So he's talking about the earth in verse 4. He goes on in verse 9 and he says, when I made the cloud the garment thereof, and thick darkness a swaddling for it. So the cloud is a garment that covers the earth, right? And above that cloud there's a blue border. Well, he tells us on our garments to put a blue border on the 4 borders, just like the earth is the cloud. It's its garment, and it has a blue border above it on the 4 quarters, or all the way around the earth, all the way, is what I believe it's saying. All right. Something interesting I wanted to look at here as well. It says, and before the throne there was a sea of glass. A sea of glass. And if we go back to Genesis in 1:10, it says, and God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. So this is also where he divides the water above from the water below. And so you have waters above and below. Those waters above, I believe, were either a cloud or a giant bubble. But I find it interesting that he says he covered the earth with a cloud, so I lean more towards a cloud. But could Revelation be talking about when the waters do go back up in the atmosphere, which I believe they will, because something's got to keep that light out to give long lifespans, because the Bible tells us that during that time that someone who dies at 100 years old will be considered a child. And the book of Jubilees says that the lifespans will be restored to that, to being almost 1,000 years again. And in Revelation here it says that before the throne there was a sea of glass like unto crystal. So is this referencing that around the earth that the water will go back up into the atmosphere because centrifugal force and Coriolis effect and conservation of angular momentum? The faster the earth spins, now you have stuff that's, the water's going to stay up in the atmosphere. It's not going to fall back down. So does it create a big bubble and it's like a sea of glass that you can actually see through like crystal? I don't know. Could that be what that's referring to there? And then in Revelation 15:2 it says, and I saw as it were a sea of glass mingled with fire. So if you're up in heaven and you're looking through it at all the war and the destruction and everything that's taking place during the Great Tribulation, it would look like a sea of glass mingled with fire. So you're looking through this giant bubble of water, crystal clear, but you're looking through it, seeing the earth ablaze with fire. Anyway, I'm not hard set on that, but I find that interesting. Because again, he calls the waters seas, and so the waters below were called seas, but were the waters above also seas? I don't know. Something to think about. All right, so let's get back to dinosaurs. Where does that word come from? In 1841, Richard Owen, the first director of London's Natural History Museum, gave the name dinosaurs to these giant prehistoric reptiles. So they weren't called dinosaurs before, they were called dragons, or Leviathan, or Behemoth. And it says that word dinosaur is from the Greek, and it means terrible lizard. That's what it means. Dinos is terrible, and saurus is lizard. So even the Greek calls these dinosaurs lizards. And what do we know about lizards? They don't stop growing. Except some of them do, but not all of them. Some of them don't stop. Some of them grow faster, and some of them grow much slower, but they don't stop. And some completely do stop. Some do, but not all of them. So with that, again, if you had an atmosphere with 35% oxygen, with 86% land, with water up in the atmosphere keeping out the harmful rays, you would have lizards. Well, one, you would have humans that would be able to live to be 1,000 years old. Two, you would have lizards that would grow to immense sizes, huge. And then if that were the case, we should find, if there was a biblical flood, like the Bible says, we should find these dinosaurs and human beings buried all over the earth. We should also find evidence of civilizations, cities built that were stopped mid-construction because they would have been building and it would have been halted. And we find that on these megalithic sites. Every one of them has, every one of them in Lebanon, Baalbek Temple, there's stones still uncut. Aswan Quarry, stones still being cut. In China, stones still being cut. They never finished. In Easter Island, stones still being cut. In Mexico, all of these places at these megalithic sites, something caused these people to go away somewhere. I believe the biblical flood. During the time the cities were still being built, unfinished. And then also we find these dinosaurs laid down, not only by sand, but debris and rubble, to be evidence for us today that the Word of God is still true and directly relevant to our lives. And that is what we find. We find dinosaurs, or behemoth, leviathans, dragons, laid down all over the earth, buried by a worldwide flood. Not just in one localized area, the whole world, everywhere, has them. And they're not billions of years old. They existed before a flood when the atmosphere was perfect for men to live longer and these reptiles to continue to keep growing. Now, was it always the case that reptiles were able to do that? I don't know. Maybe they messed with the DNA and allowed, and reptiles were the ones that got played with or something and caused them to keep growing. Was that the original intent? I can't say one way or the other. I don't know. There's nothing anywhere that says that. But some would believe that maybe their DNA was tampered with, and then reptiles were able to do that, and then maybe they use that same DNA tampering for humans, and that's why we see pictures of giant humans at all of these places as well. All right, moving on. So in some places, these megalithic sites, like Ta Prohm in Cambodia, you see this picture, and many people in the trying to find creation evidence would say this is a dinosaur, but then other people would say this is not a dinosaur. I'm going to say, it's very likely it's actually not a dinosaur. Though it looks like it has scales, that could just be the artwork, because if you actually look at this thing from where it is, that's what it looks like. And you can see that there's artwork and these scales looking things all the way around it. Okay, and if you look to the right, the picture above and the picture below, you can see it could just be like a regular cow or animal or something. So I'm not going one. Let's say for a minute that it's not. Let's say that it's not. But one thing that I want to push forward for you, one is look at the detail here of this rock carving. All of these places are megalithic. They all have the evidence of these. You can see here polygonal masonry just to the left. You can see where the stones are so tightly fit together. They have the curved cuts. If you look at that dinosaur that they say is a dinosaur, but it's debated. Look to the left and look at the stones. You can see that polygonal masonry, which we find all over the world. But another thing I want to talk to you about is if you look at this, again, there's this guy at the very bottom. So going back, all the way at the very bottom. What is that? Is that something that existed, or is that just art? Because when you look at all these things that are carved on these walls, you will find normal animals, completely normal. But then every once in a while, you'll find something like this and go, this is like, what's going on here? Is this an animal? Is this a person? Is this half man, half animal, half person? And you find that all throughout India, Cambodia, Indonesia, all of these things. So keep that in mind. And see, this is what they say that animal is. And I would agree. That kind of does not look like that guy up there to the top right. The head does not look right. But for creation scientists, they say that they believe that it is a dinosaur. And it could be. Very well could be. A dragon of some sorts. Because the one just below it, if you look, I didn't blow up that picture, but that weird looking creature all the way at the bottom, the first animal above him almost looks like a dragon head of some sort. I don't know. But we won't look at all the dragon pictures. I've showed those before. Maybe we'll look at those again later, but they're all over. These very large serpents. Some are 7-headed, some are 9-headed, some have 2 heads. But all throughout China and Japan and all these areas, you always have these pictures of this fire-breathing dragon. Anyway, again, so there's what they try to say that thing is, and could it be? Maybe, but more likely, I would agree that it doesn't really look like it with the head, but it could be one with a bigger head. But again, what I want to point out, where that thing was found, this is what it looked like where they found that area. Buried, just like and overgrown in the jungle. Destruction and left. Nobody knows why. Who built it, how they built it, why they built it, or how it got destroyed. Nobody knows. It's the same story at all of these places. And this is what it looks like today. And you can see the pillar to the left there, where the wood's holding it up. That's the pillar that we just looked at to the left, and you can see what they had to dig up in these different things. So, and here you go. Just recently, in April of 2014, at this same place, they found even more stuff buried. Even more stuff buried. And you can even see off to the right there is this man, and behind him is the serpent with many heads. I think that's the 7-headed one or the 9-headed. I can't quite tell. But you can see lingams in here and all kinds of things, destruction, buried. And all throughout the area, you can see in 2014 they started digging up different things. And this wasn't just... These stones weigh a ton. And what buried them? Maybe a worldwide flood? That's my belief. And so here's some of the things you can see were buried. And you can see behind his head, here this is... I don't know if some of the heads are missing, but this one here only has 5 serpent heads behind it. But is this something that's just art? Because we see this not only here, we see it in India, we see it all throughout the world. Mexico, Chichen Itza, you see it at Teotihuacan in Mexico, all over. Why are they all drawing in these same depictions? This is what it looks like on the back. And there's a lingam, and they worship these lingams today. Why would they find them destroyed like this unless something destroyed it? So this Taprom, I don't know how to say that correctly, but this is Cambodia. And also in Cambodia they found Angkor Wat, which was the city that they believed was didn't exist, right? Until they actually found it. They thought it was a mythical city. Same thing with like many of these places. And they're still finding more all around the world. Mexico, India, all over they find buried ruins still to be discovered. And you can see over here, this is a whole bunch of temples in this area of Angkor Wat, because it's not just Angkor Wat, there's all of these around it. And people don't realize how many there are and how many were destroyed that they had to put back together. And you can see here to the right is, again, a serpent. And I've shown you in many of these. This one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is the 9-headed one. And then 3 heads below it. So is it a serpent on top of a serpent? 12 heads? You see them all over. Is it just art, or did this really exist? And is this what the Bible referred to as a dragon? I don't know. But here's Angkor Thom, which is in Cambodia as well. And you can see what they found. They started digging deeper, and there's even more stuff below. Again, buried by a worldwide flood. I've showed you these pictures before. This is Rani Ki Vav in India. Just a small little park, and as they dig it up, it's this multi-level megalithic, inverted, what they would call temple. We don't know what it was really used for. All over the world, buried in Egypt, Mexico. Still below Chichen Itza, they found there's even more pyramidal shapes continuing to go further down. How deep? I don't know. I don't know that they know. In Easter Island, buried. Easter Island, buried. And not only that, all over they find still rock carvings. You can see up there in the middle. The Moai statues are still halfway carved out of the rock. It's still being carved. Where did the people go? Why did they leave it? How are these laid down, knocked over, completely buried? A worldwide flood. Here's, Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, and they're finding more tepes. Originally they said that the people built it and then they buried it so no one would find it. Well, no, if you look there, that thing is completely buried. Some of them were knocked over, some of them still standing. How did it get buried? A worldwide flood. They would tell you that the locals that built it buried it so people wouldn't find it. And maybe they put in the hundreds of thousands of hours to do that at this one place, but then they did it at Karahan Tepe and the other ones that they're finding? No, they didn't. It was a worldwide flood. Not 10,000 years ago, not billions of years ago, but about 4,500 years ago. The Sphinx in Egypt, they didn't know there was a city below that, buried all the way up to its neck until 1920s when they started digging all that sand away. And there's a city below there that you can go visit today, and a megalithic site with polygonal masonry that we can't duplicate and they don't know how. And it looks very similar to what you would find in Peru. How is that the case? It's because these things were megalithic giants, both the cities, the people, the reptiles before the flood, and they were buried by a worldwide flood, leaving the evidence for us today. Because if these dinosaurs would have died off in a volcano or just loss of oxygen or whatnot, we wouldn't find dinosaurs buried giving birth. We wouldn't find dinosaurs buried while running. We wouldn't find them preserved like we do today. If they just died in the open air, the sun would have taken care of all of the remains and we wouldn't have it today. But the evidence is here for you to prove the Bible. Again, here's different layers of different layers of animals that were covered at different levels. This was nothing. This isn't thousands of years, different layers. This is a flood. Again, here we see these different layers of bones, some belonging to the same animal. This is from a flood, not from millions of years. Different layers of dinosaur bones laid all around. Here we have them again. Giant beasts. This is in Utah. You have dinosaur footprints fossilized in the stone. So this was once not stone, but mud of sorts, and strong enough mud that a dinosaur could put its feet in it and leave that footprint, but then become fossilized. And you can see, here's other dinosaur footprints to the left. And then you can see the ones to the right. This is a giant dinosaur, maybe, I don't know, a brontosaurus, a big boy with very flat feet. But then these ones here, you can see the footprint there. And then I'll show you here in a moment where you can see it was running. But you can see the size of these footprints. This is in Utah, and you can see the footprints as it's running away on top of this mud. And here you go, more footprints. But what's interesting about this area that I've found fascinating is these fossilized footprints are here, but there's also fossilized juniper berries. These are seeds, juniper seeds, the berries that come from the juniper tree. And these are fossilized in that area. But if these were billions of years ago, how is it that these seeds are still growing in the area today? Because that's what those trees are. And those berries are juniper berries that got stuck in the mud and fossilized. Was that billions of years ago? Well, if it was, they're still growing there today. That's interesting. Not billions of years, but thousands of years. And you can see many of them all over the place. And there's the bushes. And you can find that at the Copper Ridge Dinosaur Tracks in Moab, Utah. And there's also the Mill Canyon right down the road, more dinosaur tracks. But now there's many different species in this area running all over the place. What are they running from? And you can see here all of these different footprints. More footprints. And again, footprints on fossilized stone. This is a different type of stone. This is more green. So that doesn't just happen. This isn't billions of years. This is only a couple of thousand years ago that these are there. It doesn't take billions of years. This is down in White Sands, New Mexico. They found fossilized human prints. And they say they are fossilized human prints. You can see right there the national monument, and they tell you that they are fossilized footprints. So looking at those, they call those footprints, right? And you can kind of hardly tell that those are footprints. They look more like shoes. These ones look very much like footprints, right? Kind of weird looking feet, but they do look like footprints. And they call them footprints at White Sands. But then when you go over to the Paluxy River in Texas, where they found a human footprint and a dinosaur footprint, they're going to say, that human footprint, we're not quite sure that just doesn't look like a human footprint. That's what they say. We're not sure that that's a human footprint. Okay. Yeah, maybe not, but it gives evidence that there's human footprint and then there is a dinosaur footprint over top of that same footprint, fossilized from the mud. And here you can see them, they cut some of these out that they'd found. That's a pretty darn big foot right there, by the way. If you look at that, that's a big foot. And here's some more that they found there at in New Mexico. Anyway, they also found these dinosaur things in Acambro, Mexico. And they say, well, we don't know that these are dinosaurs. Okay. But they were made, and we don't know who made them. Maybe they're a fake, I don't know. But they find these different things. So is there evidence of dinosaurs? Sure there is. Is there evidence of them in the Bible? Yes. They didn't call them dinosaurs. They called them dragons, Behemoth, or Leviathan, or Nahash, also Tanim. And we find the evidence buried all over the earth. Large, giant bones, whether from people, though any of the evidence of large people bones have disappeared over the years, but there have been news articles and newspapers and people from word of mouth saying that they've found giants, and the government takes them. I don't know if the government's taking them. I don't know if they died before and got killed off and the bones used or whatnot. That's what I'm led to believe. So that would mean if they did die, if these giants did die, giant people before the flood, then we wouldn't find their bones buried. But maybe larger people like we talked about earlier, that not the direct descendants from the angels and women, but their children who are, that DNA continued to go through. But the direct descendants, the Nephilim, which we would have called hybrids, which the Greeks would have called demigods, which all of these would call, half God, half man, which is not half God, half man, but half angel, half man. Both beings created by God and fallen, both of them fallen. Again, all over the place. This animal didn't just lay down and die, it was buried and covered by a worldwide flood. We have evidence. This guy was found in a mine in Canada, the Millennium Mine in Canada, and his skin is still fossilized. This wouldn't have happened unless he was buried. Again, pictures of him. In New Zealand, we have still the flesh of dinosaurs, where you can get the DNA from the flesh, tissue, soft tissue, still there. That doesn't take billions of years. That's only thousands of years ago, and we only have it because it was buried and preserved perfectly. We have trees that are buried by many different layers of strata. Same with these animals. We showed you pictures of different layers of them. Not billions of years, but different sediment layers being moved by water that settled in their sediment layer. If you take the different grains of sand, we have those little toys that we used to shake with water in them, and we'd let the different sediment layers, they would level themselves out in 10 seconds because they have different weights, different buoyancy. And so heavier ones will go to the bottom, and then so forth and so forth. And that's what we see here. Not billions of years, just different layers of different type of sediment. But we have fossilized trees. Many different dinosaurs that we found over the years. There's thousands. They're finding new ones all the time. Just like we're finding thousands of megalithic cities, new ones all the time. Evidence of a world being destroyed by a flood, giving evidence to what the Bible says. Many different predators of the reptile race, and also vegetarians of the reptile race. All different kinds, all over the world. Many different dinosaurs all over the world. But we don't have them today. They wouldn't survive in our atmosphere. So shortly after the flood, any that would have survived or that went onto the ark, which would just be regular lizards today. And that's what we have, because these beasts can't keep growing because they die off too quick, and they wouldn't be able to survive with the oxygen that we have today anyway. So again, these animals are buried all over the place. And you might say, well, Jeremy, where's the evidence of the people? Well, we have it, we just don't choose to see it, because places like Mohenjo-Daro in Pakistan, which is also that whole area, there's evidence of these people were running from something, or they just laid down dead and were buried, almost as if they just said, you know what, we can't get away from it. They laid down and were buried alive. And we know that because we'll look at some pictures here in a second of them running in the streets, and they were laid down and buried. But another thing that's interesting about this place, this is one of the areas where they say that the radiation is so high, nuclear radiation. How did nuclear radiation get there? They found the nuclear glass there. How? Was there a point in time where some sort of a nuclear blast happened that caused the earth to tilt, caused the flood to happen? I don't know. But we also have evidence of not only dinosaurs, not only cities, but people being laid down by a worldwide flood and buried, such as Mohenjo-Daro in Pakistan. And here's the picture of some of them running in the street that they dug up. These people that were just there, covered and buried for thousands of years, well, they would say hundreds, until we found them. So in 2 Peter 3:3 it says, knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days scoffers, walking after their own lusts, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. Right? The scoffers. It says, for this they are willingly ignorant. Willingly, because the evidence is there all over the world, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water, whereby the world that then was being overflowed with water perished. The world that then was, these megalithic cities, these megalithic beasts, and these people were all buried with water and perished. But people are willingly ignorant that this happened. They want to say, that's not, it's billions of years. Or the other one is aliens, instead of accepting the word of God, knowing that we have a loving God that's trying to restore us back to an immortal state, to be with him forever. But we choose not. We choose the mortal state here in this life. We choose the things of this world rather than the things that God prepared for us. This isn't what he had intended for us. This was the outcome of our choice. And death entered the world, and anger and bitterness and hate and greed and war and murder and lust and adulteries. Those were not what God ever intended for us. We chose that, and we see the result of it in our world today. Peter goes on and says, but the heavens and earth which are now by the same word are kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment of perdition of ungodly men. We see where they're standing on the sea of glass, and it's mingled with fire. We see that the earth in many of the prophecies is going to be cleansed with fire, just as it was once cleansed with water. And God doesn't want you to take part in that. He wants to save you from that and through it. But you have to choose the light, Yeshua, who saves us. We have the evidence of the flood all right, the scars where it says the fountains of the great deep broke open. We also see that the waters came down from heaven. They're trying to restore themselves with the clouds every day, but they can't. They keep falling down as rain. It wasn't Pangea that moved the earth. It was these cracks of water that came flowing out, pushing the sand, the debris, the rubble, carving out our continents today, leaving behind the scars as evidence that the worldwide flood did happen. We see that here today. These are the hot spots where all the volcanoes are all around the world, and they're burping, ready to erupt all over. This is them, the hot spots, what we would call fault lines. They're not fault lines, they're breaks in the earth where the fountains of the great deep broke open and the water came flowing out, pushing that water, carving our continents that we have today. But it says in Peter, it says, but beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day. The creation story is a picture of this 6,000 year period of mortality, 7,000 when Yeshua will reign for 1,000 years. That's Jesus. For 1,000 years he will reign. And the eighth day being the picture of when those that chose him go into eternity, and those that didn't got to live their lives here and accepted this life rather than the life to come. It goes on, it says, the Lord is not slack concerning his promise, as some men count slackness, but is long-suffering toward us, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. So when people say, why does God let all this stuff happen? It's because he's waiting for all of those that are to be born to choose him, to choose life rather than death, to accept the free gift through his Son that he's given us. He goes on, he says, but the day of the Lord, the day Yeshua is master of the Sabbath, it's the Sabbath, the 7th millennium, I believe, will come as a thief in the night. The day is 1,000 year period that Yeshua will reign. But when it comes, there's great tribulation that starts it, because the earth is going to be going back to, I believe, allowing for long life, but it has to go through great tribulation before it can get to that. The earth, I believe, will tilt, it will shake, it will do all these things, men's hearts, for fear of what's coming. It says it'll come as a thief in the night, which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat, and the earth also and the works thereof shall be burned up. It's coming. And so, like we've talked about many times before, God originally created man eternal to know good. And they had that tree of good and evil there in the garden. There was a purpose for it. And people say, well, why did God put it there if he knew that Adam and Eve were going to eat from it? Well, there was a purpose for that. Just like there's a purpose for an electrical outlet in your house, but you tell your child not to stick their finger in it because if they do, something bad's going to happen. Well, there was a purpose for that tree. There was a purpose for what was going on. And until it's taken out of the way, things will be what they will be. But again, people say, why? Well, that's because he gave you choice. He told us not to do it, but we disobeyed, and we did it, and we see the outcome from it. It's the death that's entered this world, the evil, the pain, and so forth. But in the 6 days of creation, it is a picture of the 6,000-year period. The 7th day is a picture of Yeshua's reign. And I go through that in this video, but we're going to stop it here to keep it short. So go look at those Millennial Days of Creation series. But from here, I just want to say, bless you and keep you. Make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Lift up his face towards you and give you peace. Until next time, shalom.